The U.S. Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation will come to order. Today we have the pleasure of hearing from the Department of Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo about the department's budget request for fiscal year 2023. So welcome, Madam Secretary. Glad to have you here before the committee again. The committee's commerce statutory duty is to foster, promote, and develop foreign and domestic commerce, and the Secretary has been very busy doing that on many fronts. Today we'll hear about the President's budget request and obviously the various agencies within the Department of Commerce. I'd like to start with Noaa. I see that you are seeking an increase of about 17% from current funding. The agency's National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration has never been more important to families facing the climate burdens and extreme storms, weather, flooding, and drought. So we look forward to NOAA's efforts to help ensure and sustain fisheries in the United States and to invest in innovation that will build strong and resilient coastal communities, something I'm sure you know a lot about as former governor of a coastal state. So we look forward to your work and thoughts on how we make continued investment. I'm looking forward to the department's response and how bipartisan infrastructure funding in these areas can help address salmon decline. And I look forward to hearing any updates from you on the Office of Space and Commerce that resides within NOAA. Our colleagues here are very interested in that. I think Senator Wicker and I sent a letter to you on that issue. I also want to say that Senator Wicker and I have been working on a NOAA Organic Act. We think this is very important in strengthening the science and voices of the department, and we very much appreciate Dr. Spinrad's helpfulness in this, and so we look forward to continue to working with you on that issue. Secretary Raimondo also oversees the National Telecommunications and Information Administration, obviously also seeking an increase. These funds will help NTIA to continue their work on spectrum management, broadband, cybersecurity, and privacy. Also, another very important aspect of what our government is facing at this time, cybersecurity and the impacts of what we saw from Colonial Pipeline makes this investment very necessary. As our airwaves get more crowded and spectrum becomes scarcer, it's critical that NTIA ensure the process of sharing federal spectrum goes smoothly, and that includes working with various federal agencies like NASA and NOAA and FAA, along with the commercial interests. And obviously, broadband funding and equity, I'm sure will be an issue that comes up at today's hearing, given the bipartisan infrastructure investment and how we continue to move forward on deployment. But front and center in our minds in the United States Senate at this moment is how we get to conference on the U.S. Innovation and Competition Act and how we give you the tools to help us be more competitive in this economy of today. Obviously, this committee did good work more than a year ago to help give the department the ability to respond to and prevent and respond to supply chain problems and crises and competition. So these important issues and your budget builds on programs like the Manufacturing Extension Partnership Program, MIP, and programs that assist small and medium-sized manufacturers by supporting them on workforce training, supply chain resiliency, and technology development. And these issues, again, I'm glad to see the President's budget request in this area. Obviously, the agency, if the U.S. Innovation Competition Act would pass, would receive $52 billion in funding to help us with this chip supply chain shortage and issues. So we'll look forward to asking you questions about that and our competitiveness in this area. We had a hearing before we left for the recess with many of the manufacturers of silicon, of chip manufacturing in the United States, and they told us we didn't have time to wait. So I hope our colleagues will heed that and help us move forward. I think in February you issued a report, Information and Communications Technology Supply Chain, that revealed a lack of supply chain diversity and domestic production. and an underinvestment in our domestic workforce. So look forward to hearing how the budget will help us on that. So the current state of challenges facing us are many. We look forward to hearing your comments on that, and I'll turn it over to my colleague, Senator Wicker, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Senator Cantwell. It's great to be back in here. Good to see Secretary Raimondo again. I'm going to put my whole statement in the record and just tell you what my statement was going to say. Appreciate you coming to Mississippi early on. Also, please tell Secretary Graves how much we appreciate his visit. My statement will indicate my support for funding increases for Manufacturing USA program, Manufacturing Extension Partnership, and of course the Minority Business Development Agency, which we intend to utilize quite effectively in Mississippi. The chair is correct that we eagerly await the final passage of USICA. I do believe in the end it will greatly resemble the product that Senator Cantwell and I have worked on. And again, we want to hear today about plans to distribute over $40 billion in broadband build-out, most important to states like mine in the great heartland of America. I also look forward to hearing about Spectrum Coordination Initiative, the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework. As the chair says, the Office of Space Commerce. And then, if I can take a deep breath and say, no hearing with Commerce would be complete without a mention of Red Snapper. And so I hope the department's request for increased funding to build a fisheries survey that is accurate will proceed. Recreational fishermen are an important part of our economy. They should not be unfairly penalized for inaccurate federal data. And in my state of Mississippi, we've developed a very nifty way, scientific way, of giving an accurate understanding about the recreational harvest, and I look forward to continuing to work with Noaa. Having said that, I ask unanimous consent that my full statement be admitted into the record, and we are absolutely delighted to have this wonderful public servant with us today.
Without objection. Secretary Raimondo, again, welcome. Thank you so much. I think hearing the list of both my statement and Senator Wicker's makes us tired just thinking of all the oversight and responsibilities Yes, so we look forward to hearing your comments. Thank you.
Well, thank you both very much for having me here, and thank you for all of your partnership since I have had this job over the last year. I can't tell you how much I appreciate your support. Yes, the Commerce Department's mission is broad, and I would argue more important than ever. The issues that you have just said are more important than ever. So permit me, please, to go through the 6 key areas that we are asking for additional funding, where the President's budget asks for additional funding. All of these investments are focused on the same goal, which is to enhance America's ability to compete. So first, the budget strengthens the nation's supply chains by investing in domestic manufacturing. As Senator Wicker said, it calls for $275 million of an increase in the Manufacturing Extension Program and $97 million for Manufacturing USA, both of which are aimed at strengthening domestic supply chains with a particular focus on small and medium-sized manufacturers to help them improve their competitiveness. The budget also proposes $16.1 million to augment the Commerce Department's data, tools, and expertise to support more secure and diversified supply chains. Secondly, the budget positions us to compete globally, protect our national security, and continue to lead a global coalition united against Russia's aggression. Specifically, it calls for $630 million for ITA to enhance commercial diplomacy and export promotion, and also provides BIS nearly $200 million to apply and enforce export controls and strengthen our efforts to counter new threats from China and Russia. Third, the budget invests in equitable and inclusive economic growth for all Americans. I firmly believe that America's diversity is our greatest strength and our competitive advantage. As a result, this budget provides for $500 million for EDA to help communities experiencing economic distress take control of their future and position themselves for economic prosperity and resiliency. It proposes $110 million for the MBDA, which the ranking member just mentioned, to meet the full authorization that was included in the bipartisan infrastructure law. And part of this funding will be used to open new regional offices and establish rural business centers in partnership with minority-serving institutions. Fourth, the budget takes historic action to combat the climate crisis. I certainly agree with you, Chairwoman, that there's never been a more important time for Noaa as it relates to climate. The budget accordingly includes $6.9 billion for Noaa to continue providing data, strategies, and expertise necessary to address the climate crisis. The request also supports programs to catalyze wind energy, restore habitats, protect oceans and coasts, and improves NOAA's ability to predict extreme weather events associated with climate change. The budget also proposes $87 million for the Office of Space Commerce, which I expect we'll talk about today. Fifth, the budget expands opportunity and discovery through data. Timely data is critical to supporting American competitiveness, innovation, and growth of quality jobs. The budget provides the Census Bureau with $1.5 billion to continue its transformation to a 21st century data-centric model and calls for $141 million for the BEA to support new data on supply chains. And finally, sixth, the budget ensures the department can provide 21st century service to the American public. It proposes new funds to enhance cybersecurity and increase the diversity and equity of our workforce in cyber. And finally, I must close with mentioning USICA. I want to begin by thanking you both for your incredible leadership on this and pledging to you here and now to do anything in my power to get this over the finish line in a bipartisan way as quickly as possible, because the need is urgent, as the chairwoman said. The Commerce Department has key priorities in the bill, many of which are this committee's priorities as well, including the $52 billion for CHIPS funding, the tech hubs, supply chain authorities. I cannot say strongly enough the urgency with which we must act. Other countries aren't waiting for us. China's invested $150 billion. Germany, Singapore, Spain, France are all investing. Existing fabs are operating at 90% capacity today, and demand is about 17% above pre-pandemic levels. The time for us to act is now, and I look forward to working with you to do that.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. That's a great list, and we appreciate your enthusiasm as well on this, and look forward to working with you. If I could start with Noaa, I was pleased that the Department of Commerce executed funding for the Pacific Coastal Salmon Recovery Fund and the National Ocean and Coastal Security Resiliency Fund. These are important aspects of our bipartisan efforts. I am concerned that the department or Noaa may not be taking an active leadership role in culvert removal. One of the big issues that we've seen across the United States is infrastructure that has created blocking for fish passage. So will you work with the Department of Transportation and Noaa Science to get more aggressive on this program?
Yes, with DOT and also Interior, yes.
Yes, thank you. Well, we just, again, I could give you examples across the United States of the same problem. I'm very well aware of them in the Northwest, but the bottom line is our transportation infrastructure has blocked fish passage, and we need to correct that issue. So thank you. You mentioned the chip shortage. I wondered if you could talk about, given Russia's attack on Ukraine and disruptions of the pandemic and vulnerabilities of the U.S. supply chain, what is it that we need to do to make sure that that we get ahead of this from a supply chain perspective on chips, and what we need to do to also get the workforce to be ready to catapult. Our information is that the shortage that we experience today is only going to double or triple if we don't get more in manufacturing. But we're also trying to understand why catching up as soon as possible is critically important. So if you could comment on that.
Yeah, so the president's budget calls for an increase for supply chains, which will enable us to meet the immediate crisis caused by Ukraine, caused by COVID. But that isn't nearly enough. That's treading water, barely. Right now in the Commerce Department, I have 40 different work streams on supply chains going. We have a handful of people doing it. Other countries have 5 or 10 times as many people doing supply chain work. What we really need is what USICA provides for, which is an ongoing, robust supply chain management infrastructure in the federal government. So we can do constant, continuous mapping and monitoring, data analytics, stakeholder engagement, predicting bottlenecks. Like, the reason we're in this mess is because we haven't been doing that. And with respect to chips, I don't think it's an exaggeration to say this is a national emergency. It is threatening our national security as well as our economic security. We did a RFI. Over 150 semiconductor supply chain companies responded. They're operating at their max capacity. The average consuming industry has fewer than 5 days of inventory. I hear it every day. Medical equipment manufacturers, military, I've been talking to all the defense contractors. Their bottleneck, the rate limiting factor is chips. So I don't know how else to say it. We need to invest this money to increase domestic production of chips and use some of the money, as you said, to invest in our workforce. We don't have the workforce now. We need the workforce developed. And by the way, we need it all over the country, which is why I think the tech hubs are just as important.
And, well, we definitely agree on the tech hubs. I want to make sure, though, that we understand this timing issue. I think, as manufacturers and the shortages become clear to everybody around the globe, other people are moving faster than we are.
Yes, thank you.
And the faster they move, the more the money follows. And so I really am worried that that even investments that people have announced,
Yes,
that they're going to build, say, in Ohio.
yes. So
And so I just hope that people realize that the longer we wait, the longer we don't send that signal, the more that initial investment may not go to Ohio. It may go over to Germany or someplace else. And so I'm just trying to get people to understand why this signal is so important.
Thank you for putting a fine point on it. You're exactly right. So as you say, Germany, Singapore, Spain, France, obviously China, are all right now, wooing Intel, Micron, Texas Instruments, all of our companies to set up facilities in their countries. And I have spoken with all of these CEOs. They want to operate in America, but they cannot wait because demand for chips is up 20% where it was a couple of years ago. They are going to build. And if we don't act quickly with USICA, they'll build elsewhere. If we do act quickly, they'll build here, and as you say, go from a $20 billion investment to a $100 billion investment in Ohio.
Thank you. Senator Wicker.
Madam Secretary, I think semiconductors and the chips issue is a national security issue. You do agree with that, don't you?
100%, yes.
And national security issues have certainly been emphasized and heightened in the last few months because of what we see and what we are looking at over the horizon. There have been some people who object to the grants. These grant recipients are going to be big companies. Some of them do business in China. There is a school of thought that this would be better done through trade negotiation policy. So why is it so important to follow the approach that's in the USICA Act? And if you could elaborate on that for a moment or two.
Yes. Let me say this. I want you to know and be reassured that my top priority will be protecting taxpayers, and I have a long track record in public service of doing that. There are clawback provisions. If this money were to be used by companies that are violating our export controls, we will claw the money back. There are taxpayer protections in statute and that we will further strengthen in regulation. This money cannot be used to build facilities in China, et cetera. At the end of the day, though, just like the chairwoman and I were talking about, if we don't act, these chip companies they are going to increase their production. And the question...
Quickly.
Quickly.
Yes.
And now. I've talked to them all. I talked to them all. By the way, I talked to all the national defense contractors recently who are working overtime on the Ukraine replenishment issue, and their biggest pain point is chips. There's 250 chips or more in every Javelin launching system.
Thank you for making that point.
So this has to happen. It has to happen now. And if you want these companies, yes, they're big, yes, they're profitable, to expand facilities in America, you must pass the CHIPS Act, USICA, and do it quickly.
Let's talk about spectrum management and coordination. There are a lot of agencies that like to get their fingers in this issue. I welcome the spectrum coordination initiative between NTIA and the FCC. Can you comment on how this new initiative will foster more efficient and effective spectrum management policies, and also how this will ensure that NTIA is in fact the voice rather than other agencies for representing the executive branch on spectrum management?
Yes, thank you. I'm very excited about this initiative. We launched it in February, and we're also in the process of renegotiating a 20-year-old MOU as between NTIA and the FCC. Because as you know, there's a complementary relationship between the FCC and NTIA, and we are in charge of federally owned spectrum. And so we're going to start increasing our presence in the interagency to make sure that we have better coordination with the FCC, but also, frankly, NTIA needs to be elevated in the discussion because we need we need an administration-wide, government-wide spectrum strategy, and we need to kind of do that in coordination, with our partners in government.
Very good. And then let me use the last minute and 17 seconds to talk about recreational fishing. Noaa has the Marine Recreational Information Program, MRIP, and it's not very good. Our state of Mississippi has developed the Tails and Scales, and it is known to be the strongest survey of red snapper fishing in the country. We'd like for Noaa to uphold the state data as the best available science. And as a matter of fact, Texas has never participated in MRIP, and they're allowed to proceed in their own way. Louisiana has stopped participating in MRIP. The West Coast uses only state data, and on top of that, Noaa helps them manage their state data. So, will you work with me to help Mississippi and other states transition away from this very flawed MRIP toward a state managed survey system like the West Coast has, and to a system like Tails and Scales, which is in fact better? It's a leading question.
Yeah. I shouldn't laugh. The answer is yes, and I know how important this is to you and your state. I've enjoyed visiting your state. I have a bit of good news, which is that NOAA is going to be releasing a proposed rule soon, which is going to increase the catch limits for 2023, and we have an initiative underway right now to do a better job of reconciling the state with the federal surveys. I know we have room to go, but I think we've made progress since I've been here, and we'll stay on it.
Perhaps a step in the right direction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Further to go.
Thank you. Well,
Further to go. Fair
I
enough.
definitely proposed as part of Build Back Better, major investment in stock assessment, because you can't do any management if you don't have the stock assessment. So we'll keep working
I'm
on
with
this.
you.
Senator Klobuchar joining us online. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair Cantwell. And I'm going to ask Secretary Raimondo, sorry about this, but we are headed to Secretary Albright's funeral. And so I wanted to get some really important questions in, but also to thank you for your work. And I think to make it easier, I'll just ask my questions so you don't have to keep hearing me go back and forth here. And then you can answer. So my first question is about the American Innovation and Choice Online Act. As you know, I chair the Antitrust Subcommittee. We're really excited about the progress that Senator Grassley and I are making with this bipartisan bill to promote innovation. And I'd love to hear your views about that. We know how important tech is to our economy, and we also want to make sure there's strong competition going on and that we don't unfairly discriminate against certain businesses, and we make sure that everyone gets a fair shake on these platforms. My second question is just a quick update on tourism, something near and dear to our hearts. Roy Blunt is on this bus with me. I know he would be asking the same question. And I also want to thank Senator Rosen for her good work on that front. And my third, just to emphasize the importance of the bill that Senator Thune and I just passed on shipping, because we want to make sure we get good rates when it comes to the international conglomerates. And if you could quickly comment on the importance of that. So I want to thank you again for your incredible work, and especially what you're doing on supervising the broadband piece of the bipartisan infrastructure bill. Look forward to hearing your answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator, and thank you for making the time to call in. I think I got all of that. So on the first question, you know, I applaud your efforts, and I've enjoyed talking to you and Congressman Cicilline, and clearly agree that we need to improve competition, which increases innovation. And last month, the DOJ released a views letter on behalf of the administration in support of the American Innovation and Choice Online Act, and the department and I, you know, certainly support that and concur with, you know, the aim of the legislation and the views expressed in that views letter. Your second question, as I heard it, related to tourism, and I think the Brand USA. I want to thank this committee and Congress for the work you've done to provide the $250 million for Brand USA. I cannot underscore enough how important that is. I don't have to tell you, and you, Senator Klobuchar, the travel and tourism industry is still struggling. There's still about 1.5 million fewer jobs in travel and tourism today than pre-pandemic, and particularly business travel and international travel have absolutely not recovered. So we have moved quickly to get $500 million already out the door from the ARP money. We have another NOFOs for another $250 million on the street now. But the Brand USA, and by the way, I should say, for the $250 million, we were 6 times oversubscribed. So again, we need this. We need to do this. And of course, I come from a state that's incredibly dependent on tourism for jobs. So thank you for your support of Brand USA. We need it, and we've got to get 1.5 million people back to work who are still out of work. And then the last question on shipping, this is obviously more in Secretary Buttigieg's lane, but certainly your legislation is something that we support. And as we deal with supply chain challenges, we have to look at there's no one silver bullet to supply chain. We have to parse it out, and shipping costs are a real problem now. And so I support legislation that is aimed at solving that problem.
Well, thank you very much for the answers. Appreciate it. Thank you, Chair Cantwell, for accommodating this. Thank you.
Yep. I have Senator Thune is next, but I don't know if he's available. Well, maybe he's available.
There's no telling where he is.
Senator Thune, I don't know if you want a minute to prepare or if you're ready to go. We would certainly accommodate you to ask your questions at this point in time.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for calling my name. I just kind of showed up. But Madam Secretary, welcome. Thank you for being here. Let me start by just talking about the BEAD program. In order for that program to be successful, we've got to encourage participation from all types of broadband providers, as long as they have met the objective, technical, financial, and operational standards set by NTIA. And any inclusion of burdensome requirements such as net neutrality, wholesale access, or rate regulations is only going to discourage participation. So I'd like to ask you to commit once again that you will follow the letter of the law and not add extraneous requirements as other agencies seem to be intent on doing with broadband money. Would you ensure that NTI carries out its duty and implements the BEAD program within the confines of the statute? And will you commit that NTI does not include net neutrality, wholesale access, or rate regulation requirements like other agencies have done?
Yes, let me speak to that. As you know, the statute expressly prohibits rate regulation, and I was heavily involved in negotiating that. So I understand the limits, and we will comply with the statute. Having said that, and we intend to work with all providers, whether that is electric utilities, middle mile providers, big ISPs, rural co-ops, et cetera. The President has been very clear that we have to make sure at the end of implementing this program, every American, every tribal lands, rural lands, et cetera, has access to high-speed, affordable internet. And so we are as focused on access as we are on affordability. And so we will be consistent with the statute without doing what we're not allowed to do, working with states who are developing their state plans to make sure that there are affordability provisions. And I believe that there are ways to do that which do not involve rate regulation or, violating the statute. But affordability is as important as access.
And I don't disagree, and I think that the key, in my view at least, is to not discourage providers from participating. You want to get as many, particularly those in unserved and underserved areas, to participate in the programs that are available. And I understand that the statute prevents rate regulation, but there's a lot of conversation around some of these other issues like net neutrality, which if that was going to be included, ought to be done by the FCC, not other agencies of government. And so adding additional requirements, I think, is going to discourage participation. So I'm just
yes, I understand. The FCC, as you say, the FCC regulates net neutrality, not us. And listen, we are pro-competition. Right? Competition drives down prices. We are working hard to figure out how to structure this program to encourage competition, which benefits the consumer.
Right. Okay. As you know, 5G connectivities will require hundreds of thousands of small cells and other equipment, and deploying this infrastructure can be unnecessarily burdensome and lengthy, with multiple series of approvals required that lack certainty with respect to if and when a governmental entity will grant approval. The type of approvals required, fees imposed for deployment of networks can be particularly problematic, leading to delays in wireless infrastructure deployment, which is a particular concern as we seek to deploy 5G as rapidly as possible throughout the United States. In last Congress, I had introduced a piece of legislation called the Streamline Small Cell Deployment Act to address many of these issues. And with all the funding that's being made available to construct and deploy fixed and mobile networks, do you support efforts to streamline permitting requests so that consumers can reap the benefits of these new technologies more quickly?
Yes, yes. I will say this, and I have firsthand experience with this as governor. A lot of the regulations and permitting requirements which will slow down broadband deployment are at the state and local level. And so, we are going to work with states to encourage them to provide simple things like access to telephone poles, dig once, provisions.
Right.
This red tape absolutely stands in the way of rapid deployment, and so, yes, I do support those efforts.
Good. We'll look forward to working with you on that, because it is something that I think acts as a deterrent to a lot of the build-out that we're going to need to get these networks up and operating. Finally, my time's expiring here very quickly. How does the NTI plan to address coordination issues with other broadband programs, such as those that are administered by the FCC, USDA, and Treasury?
Yeah, so I would say, in my zero time, it is a challenge. We are on it. The President's appointed Mitch Landrieu to be the coordinator across all of the agencies, and I can assure you, we do meet regularly, myself with Secretary Vilsack and his team, Secretary Holland, and we are requiring in every state plan that they show us how they are planning to use in every state all of their federal money. So we're going to have it all in one place so we can see it, so we can try to coordinate. But I will grant you, it is a real challenge.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator Thune. Senator Blumenthal.
Thanks, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here today, and thanks for all your great work as Secretary of Commerce and as governor of our neighboring state. I want to pursue this line of questioning on the NTIA and the historic investment that our nation is making to broadband. NTIA is responsible for implementing this grant program, literally billions of dollars, a total of $65 billion will be given as part of this program, and I think we have an obligation to make sure that it provides for universal access, American manufacturing, high-quality jobs, and competition. Senator Markey and I wrote a letter to NTIA in March regarding the Broadband Equity Access and Deployment Program, and to just come right to the point, because I know you're familiar with it, we believe, and I think many of us do, that there is a clear need to require companies building new fiber networks with federal money to allow competitors wholesale access at reasonable cost. Otherwise, we're just going to subsidize a new set of monopolies in underserved or unserved areas where there is no competition now. I'm asking you for a commitment that you will impose standalone wholesale access requirements or incentives in the NTIA broadband grant program.
Yeah, so as we just discussed, let me say this. We share totally your commitment to affordability, to competition, and to access. The requirement, I don't think, is something we can do because of the statute. Incentives are a different matter. And the way we are implementing this program, we are allowing for flexibility on a state-by-state basis. You know, it's very different in every state. So we are going to ask each state to provide us with a plan that we will have to approve that, to our satisfaction, provides for affordability. Wholesale is a way to do that. Also, we are crystal clear that every provider who accepts even a penny of federal money must provide a low-cost option.
Well, let me just interrupt for a moment, because you give away the money, you set the rules and the conditions for how the money is used. Yes, the law may not enable you to impose new requirements, new rules that are unbased on the statute, but they do permit, and in our view, the spirit of the law is that you require that wholesale access be one of the criteria for providing these grants. I'm going to move on because maybe we can follow on other topics. This is complicated, and I'd like to pursue this conversation with you, but I think you understand Senator Markey and my position.
I'm happy to follow up with you.
Let me ask you about another proposal relating to big tech. Senator Klobuchar raised the Online Competition Protection Act that she has introduced, and I'm a co-sponsor of it, but the Kids Online Safety Act. really is the result of 5 hearings. The Subcommittee on Consumer Protection, which I chair, held those hearings, and we have bipartisan support for a measure that would give parents the tools and the means they need to protect their children from the toxic content driven by black box algorithms to them. I can give you more about the Kids Online Safety Act. I believe you're familiar with it. Will you support it?
Yes, 100%. I would like to answer this first as a mother of 2 teenagers. I think this is long overdue legislation. The goals of your legislation are laudable, and as a Commerce Secretary, I feel equally strongly about it. It's long overdue. We see the corrosive effects. So yes, I'll help you in any way. Also, in President Biden's unity agenda, he's very focused on mental health and increasing mental health services, particularly to young people. Much of the reason we have that need is because we have not done a good enough job regulating the content online, particularly as it relates to our kids. So I applaud you for the initiative.
Thank you. My time has expired, but if we have a second round, I'd like to ask you about efforts by the Department of Commerce to crack down on Russia's use of our technology. The Commerce Department has a very important role in export controls. I know you're working hard on it, and I hope that at some point during your testimony this morning, you'll update us on the very important work that your department is doing on export controls to deprive Russia of the technology that it can use on the battlefield and internally to promote its aggression.
Thank you. Thank you. Is Senator Scott available? I have him joining us remotely. If not, Senator Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. And Madam Secretary, thank you for your time today. I want to thank you also. You just made some kind comments and supportive comments of the Kids Online Safety Act that I've worked on with Senator Blumenthal, so we thank you for that. I have another tech area I want to go to. The administration and the EU announced that they had reached a deal on the Transatlantic data privacy framework, pardon me, and the information put out by the White House on this said that there were further pieces of the framework that were going to need to be adopted by both sides, and more information was going to be forthcoming. And then the EU is also moving forward with rules for data use by connected devices and services, and these rules would restrict data transfers to certain countries. So I'd like to hear from you, when do you expect the Transatlantic Data Privacy Framework to go into effect, and when are we going to get the details for this? When are businesses going to know what those details are, and what guidelines and guidance is available for companies who want to engage in cross-border data transactions now before the framework goes into place?
Okay, thank you, Senator, for your excellent question. So I will say first, we sat at the table for a year in order to reach this historic agreement. And I was very involved in that negotiation and very excited to announce that we came to terms with the EU. And I know this is very important to Chair Cantwell. I mean, the truth of it is we share the same privacy values as the EU, and we ought to be able to have come to an agreement. So we came to an agreement in principle, and the next step is that we will codify that in an executive order, and then we will wait for an adequacy decision from the EU. And we are working furiously on that. I think it'll be, very soon before you see the executive order, and then, as I say, we'll have to wait for the European Court to give us an adequacy decision. In terms of what companies can expect now, there really isn't any more information that we can put out now. other than to say that for companies, many of whom I've heard from, especially small companies, they are breathing a sigh of relief to know that we will have a framework which will be, a measure of certainty for all of these companies. So the next step is an EO, which I expect will be forthcoming very soon.
Okay, thank you for that. Let me move on to the Mobile Now Act and that implementation. You had requested in your budget $9 million for the NTIA for spectrum management. And Mobile Now has directed the NTIA to make an additional 255 megahertz of spectrum available for commercial services by 2022. So do you think you're going to be able to meet that mandate, and how are you moving forward with that plan to incentivize federal agencies to relinquish or share spectrum with commercial entities?
Yes, thank you for the question. Senator, I will get back to you with the exact answer as to when we think we'll be able to meet the requirement. I'll make sure my staff follows up. With respect to your other question, it relates to the discussion we had earlier. We are in the process of, what we really need is a government-wide strategy as it relates to spectrum use. And my own view is we have to be more, we in NTIA have to be more aggressive at that table, and we have to have more creative uses of, for example, spectrum sharing. So instead of taking this in a piecemeal fashion, we are endeavoring to work with the FCC to have a nationwide strategy, including, freeing up more spectrum, which propels innovation, right? Like fundamentally, the reason we need to free up more spectrum is because whether it's cloud computing, artificial intelligence, quantum, any wireless innovation requires more spectrum, and we want to be able to compete with China and every other global economy.
Well, the last time I looked, any type of audit on a national spectrum strategy, we had a report in 2020 and we've had nothing since. So I appreciate your bringing that up. I do have a supply chain question, Madam Chairman. I will submit that for the record. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Peters, are you available? Or Senator Tester? If not, Senator Young, are you available? If not, Senator Fisher.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you to my colleagues for not being available. Thank you for being here, Madam Secretary. It is nice to see you. Following passage of the bipartisan infrastructure law, today's hearing is an important opportunity to talk with you about the funding that NTIA will be distributing for broadband deployment. As part of that law, I added an amendment to establish a broadband deployment locations map. This mapping tool will create more oversight so that government-funded broadband projects can be looked at clearly in one place. The amendment passed unanimously, showing lawmakers are united in their desire to avoid overbuilding and ensure transparency in broadband funding. But the success of this mapping tool will hinge on cooperation with the FCC from all federal agencies that provide funding for broadband deployment. In March, Senator Cortez Masto joined me in writing to agencies, including NTIA, to check up on the progress that has been made so far. Though I did hear back from the FCC by the date requested, I still have not heard back from NTIA. Do you know the status of the agency's response to that letter that we sent?
I do not, and I apologize that we didn't make the deadline, and I'll look into it and get back to you right away.
Okay.
I can tell you we are collaborating very closely with the FCC. In fact, Alan Davidson, who runs NTIA, has a weekly meeting with the chairwoman, and we are coordinating with them. The maps are critical, and we're not going to let the money go out the door until we have the maps. And precisely, especially in a state like yours, they're incredibly important. So I support the spirit of the effort fully, and I'll get you a better answer.
Great.
Your question.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I know how important it is to have that cooperation so that all the different players in this can uphold their responsibilities under the law. We want to make sure that we can maximize the broadband infrastructure funding so that all Americans can be reached by this. I would ask you, you testified before the Senate Appropriations Committee in February, and I appreciated that you did recognize the importance of expanding broadband networks to unserved areas first, as the law requires. And I know there have been many comments on this, but I don't think it can be understated. However, at that time, you did add that, quote, this doesn't mean that some of the money won't go to places that already have coverage, end quote, and that competition is not a bad thing, which you stressed again today with competition. To me, that seems like two conflicting sentiments there. Can you clarify what you mean by this, and how do you square the two? I am very, very concerned that the focus has to be on unserved areas first.
Yes, and I agree with you, and the statute is clear, right? Unserved first, unserved, underserved. I think what I was trying to say is every state is different. And for that reason, the way we're implementing this program is we are requiring every state to submit to us their state plan. Now, in a state like Rhode Island, for example, there's no unserved. Everyone is served. And they're automatically receiving $100 million. So by definition, there will be some money spent and everyone's already served. Now, in your state, obviously, that will not be the case. So the priority is crystal clear, unserved first. When we are done with this, it is our goal, ambition, and intent that every single American on a rural land, on tribal land, on urban land, has high-quality, high-speed broadband that they can afford. We do promote competition because competition does reduce prices, which is good for the consumer. But I don't know how else to say it. I mean, we're not going to overbuild. We don't want to overbuild. But what I've learned in the past year especially is you cannot overestimate the differences in every community. And so to account for that, we're going to work very closely with governors and states. And I guess I can just assure you that in your state, at the end of this, everyone unserved will be served.
Can you refresh my memory? Will you be reviewing every state plan? Is it required that the department has to approve every state plan? How does that work with it?
Yes, yes. So the way it works is we're hoping to get the NOFO out May 16th. Okay. We're working hard towards that. That will go out. Every state then has to give us their intention to participate. Once we get that letter, we send them a planning grant. Then they use that planning grant to do a state plan. They're not going to get any more money until we approve of the plan. And there'll be an aggressive back and forth using the maps, pushing on affordability, et cetera. And then we will approve the plan to make sure everyone is served, and then the money will flow.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I don't know if either Peters or Tester are online. If not, we're going to go to Senator Scott.
Good. Anybody's on? Okay. Chair Cantwell, I want to thank you for hosting this important hearing today. I've been called on the Secretary of Commerce to come testify since last fall. So I think I've been pretty disappointed that we haven't heard answers from the American people on President Biden's disastrous policies that have caused a severely crippling supply chain crisis, and it's really hurt people with inflation, which, as you know, hurts the poorest families. So 6 months of silence, I think, doesn't make sense. I don't understand why the Secretary of Commerce wouldn't want to come here and talk about this, but let's look at the numbers. The last time you testified was January of last year, I think it was. 16 months ago, inflation was 1.4%. Today, inflation has increased fivefold to 8.5%, a 40-year high. it doesn't appear to be any sign of slowing down or any plans for the Biden administration to fix anything, and I haven't seen any fixes. Every day, American families are seeing the crisis when they go buy anything they want to buy. In my state, families are worried about putting food on the table. One, the price of food. Two, get the food. Make sure they can get their pharmaceuticals, and make sure companies have the products they need to be able to survive in their business at a price that they can afford to sell. I've heard from business leaders all across my state about the impacts of the supply chain inflation is having on their business, and many businesses have had to close. So as Secretary of Commerce, you play a leading role in dealing with the supply chain and with inflation. As far as I can tell, I haven't seen a plan that's come out of the Commerce Department of how you're going to deal with this either supply chain crisis or the unbelievable inflation we're seeing now. So I think about when I was governor of Florida, we had hurricanes. You were the governor. When you have a problem, you have to get everybody together and you have to solve it. And I just haven't seen that out of the either Commerce or Homeland Security. There was a report in February that there was a supply chain report coming out of Commerce and DHS, and it had a lot of things about spending more money. I've never seen that spending more money ever reduced inflation. So I guess here's my questions. What tangible action are you taking right now that's going to reduce inflation, which is caused by supply chain crisis? When will we start seeing a reduction in the inflation? And three, we've watched what's happened with Ukraine, with Russia, where Americans are saying we can't do business with Russia anymore. Is the Commerce Department ready to focus on decoupling from China when China invades Taiwan? But thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Senator, for your questions, and it's my pleasure to be here today, and of course, I'm always available to you anytime. Look, we recognize that inflation is a challenge, and Americans are seeing it every day. And that's exactly why the President and our administration is doing everything we possibly can to do that. This administration clearly did not cause the inflation. The inflation was caused by incredible demand post-COVID, supply chain disruptions from COVID, and Putin's war exacerbating it all. And actually, if you look at Europe, they're seeing similar, if not higher inflation, but much slower economic growth. In this administration, our job growth is unprecedented. So to your point, what are we doing? What am I doing? I'm primarily focused on the chip crisis. You know, chips, semiconductor chips are in everything. And we are, I've used the Defense Production Act to do a survey of all data from over 150 chip companies. Our convenings with chip companies have led to partnerships. For example, Global Foundries has partnered with Ford and GM to reduce that problem. We've set up an early alert system so that if there's a semiconductor packaging factory that goes down in Malaysia, they can let the Commerce Department know. Commerce set that up and runs that. I stood up a supply chain task force, which has 20-plus leaders in industry. I mean, supply chains are run by the private sector. So what we're doing is increasing transparency to work with them. Yeah, go ahead.
When will inflation start going down?
Well, that would be a question for Chairman Powell. As you know, the Fed handles monetary policy and has the biggest tools around that. And he has indicated he's going to start to take action. So I think, soon, this year.
So you don't think government spending has anything to do with inflation? And permitting and regulatory environment has anything to do with inflation? It's all what the Federal Reserve does?
The Federal Reserve and its monetary policy by far has a bigger impact on inflation. Certainly government spending has an effect on that, but the government spending that we are doing and that you participated in with the infrastructure bill, for example, is investment. It's productivity enhancing investment, which I don't believe meaningfully increases inflation.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Senator Markey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great job, Madam Secretary.
Morning.
The National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's National Integrated Heat Health Information System provides life-saving guidance and research to to protect communities from extreme heat, which has recently killed more Americans than extreme weather events like hurricanes and floods. We know that extreme heat will only get worse as the planet continues to warm from human-caused climate change. My Preventing Heat, Illness, and Deaths Act would support the great work already happening to address the problem. Congress should pass my bill and increase funding for extreme heat research and mitigation. Just $2 million a year in additional funding could protect hundreds of thousands more Americans from the life-threatening risk of extreme heat. Secretary Raimondo, do you support increased funding for extreme heat research and prevention, which could turn up the temperature on our work to save lives by turning down the temperature in our communities?
I do, and I do know that this is a priority for Noaa, and we are working in the interagency on this issue.
Okay, thank you. In his State of the Union address, President Biden called for a ban on targeted ads to kids. Apps should never be allowed to track a 10-year-old's browsing history, bombard her with marketing based on that data. The Children and Teens Online Privacy Protection Act, which I've introduced, would ban targeted ads to users under the age of 13. Madam Secretary, the Commerce Department plays an important role in developing our country's technology policies. Do you agree that Congress should heed President Biden's call and pass my bill to ban targeted ads to children?
Yes, I do. As I said, we support fully the administration, the goals of your bill. And as I said earlier, as a mother of 2 teenagers, I see it every day. It's real, it's destructive, and we have to do more. It's also why the president, in his unity agenda, is calling for increased funding for mental health and make sure that kids can access that.
Yeah, what I'm becoming increasingly concerned about is that we're just following further and further behind the European Union in terms of its response to the impact which the internet, social media have upon the children in our country. And increasingly, we just have second-rate protections for the children in our country, and it's just a further example of how the Europeans look at it in its totality. Yes, the internet provides enormous economic opportunities on the one hand, but on the other hand, there is a Dickensian negative impact that it simultaneously is having, especially on the children in our country. So to the extent to which this issue just continues to sit there, the warning signs are just given to us by the headlines in newspapers every single day about the mental health condition of young people in our country right now. Could you talk a little bit about that and the interrelationship between social media and the mental health of the children in our country and why more protections are needed?
Well, as you say, I am not an expert in this, I should clarify, but as you say, the data is clear that mental illness and anxiety and depression among teens is through the roof. I should say parenthetically, I saw this as governor. I began a mental health effort in Rhode Island called It's Okay Not to Be Okay to try to eliminate the stigma. And it's clear that social media is related to that. So as I said earlier, I support the goals of your bill. I welcome an opportunity to work with you on this, Senator, because I do agree with you that more needs to be done to protect our kids.
Thank you. And the NTIA got $48 billion for broadband. And I just think it's just such an important opportunity to use that funding in order to promote affordability, promote competition, and to ensure that the internet is free and open. And I know you're doing a great job on this, but the faster we move it, I think, is the better off our country is going to be.
I understand. As you say, we're working like crazy on this. The big component, which is called the BEAD program, we hope to have the notice of funding opportunity out May 16th. And I very much look forward to working with you and your governor to get this done in your state.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Senator Capito.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here with us, Madam Secretary. Really appreciate it. You know my great interest on the broadband deployment. We've talked about this several times. So just kind of quick questions. I heard you mention May 16th. You had testified before that that's going to be the day that you're going to be soliciting or beginning to solicit state plans. Is that still?
Yes, that's
Okay.
the plan. We are charging towards that date.
Okay. You had also mentioned in previous testimony that each state is going to have a representative from NTIA that's going to help them move. How are you doing on that? Have you appointed those? Are you still sticking with that original plan?
Yes, we're still sticking with that original plan. The way I want to run this is that every state has a person they can call. So
Right.
if there's any issue in West Virginia, you call such and such.
Right.
So we haven't yet recruited everyone. We're in the process. We are aggressively hiring. We're more than halfway there, I can tell you. And we're like onboarding people every day.
Well, we're anxious for that, as you
Yeah.
can imagine. We have talked, too, about the different conflicts between FCC, RDOF, USDA, Reconnect, some ARC programs, and then NTIA programs. We're running into a bit of an issue with this on the coordination factor. Can you go through an RDOF region if you're connecting two different, say, counties? How are you doing on that coordination? You said you were going to put together a committee to work on this. I mean, we're still not getting good answers here.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. I was in South Carolina Friday with Whip Clyburn, and I met with community people, and the same thing came up. You know, how do we do this? So I think at our level, the White House is coordinating an interagency so that Mitch Landrieu gets us all together on a regular basis and our teams together. But the truth of it is, I think the most impactful thing is that every state, when they put together their state plan, we're requiring them to detail in their state plan how they're going to use all of their federal money. So, for example, in the West Virginia state plan, they're going to have to show us on paper how they plan to use RDOF, how they plan to use USDA, how they plan to use tribal, and we're hoping that by putting it all in one place, it will enable us to better coordinate.
Yeah, so here's the problem. I know RDOF's not your problem, but, RDOF's got a 5-year window, so if the whole program shows out that everybody's going to be deployed from that program, which we know is not going to happen, we know at some point the providers are going to send the money back, they couldn't do it or pay the fine or whatever, we're going to be 5 years down the road and realize, we should have worked better together. I would like to see, I would hope that you would have a carve-out for the broadband deployment area and not have this just be a general coordinating committee, because if you're trying to coordinate
absolutely, yes.
transportation, water, and all this, and it's never going to get down to the detail it needs to. So this is a big issue. And we're luckily and unluckily, we're eligible for a lot of funding because we still have a lot of unserved and underserved. But you can see if the conflicts come in, at the end of it, we don't want to say, wow, we're still not there yet. So anything we can do on that to work with you, we have a lot of good data. We would like to do that.
Thank you.
Inflation of prices, what kind of impact is that going to have on the ability to deploy? What are you seeing there? Because I'm hearing this everywhere.
Yeah, so by the way, on the first thing, I should have clarified, these are broadband-specific meetings that we have, just broadband. Secondly, listen, I agree with you. It's among the greatest challenges of this, and I think there's no one answer. It's constant, obsessive communication, collaboration, and working with the team. So I'll follow up with you. We need to increase domestic supply. Like the bottom line, and I am working with domestic producers of fiber and cable. We need to increase domestic supply. That is the way.
To get the price down.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, sorry, right. The demand. Listen, this is economics 101. Because we're spending all this money for broadband deployment, demand is going to be higher for all of this equipment, and so we need to increase supply. And there are Buy American provisions in the statute. So I am working very aggressively with. There's only one. Corning is the one producer in the U.S., and we're meeting with them and with the ISPs to try to use the occasion of this increased demand to to get them to increase domestic supply so we create jobs and prices don't go up.
Well, the good news for us on Corning is they have a great legacy in the state of West Virginia where they were in the glassmaking business. So we will follow up with them.
Maybe get more jobs out of this and lower prices.
That would be good. I do have a question on EDA, but I'll submit that for the record, and thank you.
Thank you, Senator Capito. Senator Tester.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank Secretary Armando for being here today. Look, the pandemic has shown us that internet access is essential to everyday life. Internet connectivity has always been a major challenge in rural states like Montana. According to many of the surveys that are out there and the reports, Montana is consistently dead last or almost dead last out of the 50 states in terms of internet service. Hundreds of thousands of Montanans still lack reliable and affordable access to the internet in the year of 2022. As you are well aware, the bipartisan infrastructure package that I led with my colleagues is bringing about $65 billion to states to close the digital divide. This infrastructure package tasks NTIA with distributing the majority of that funding, nearly $50 billion in broadband grants to states so that they can finally meet internet access in unserved areas like rural and frontier communities. We are literally at a pivotal moment in time. We need to get this right. I want to make sure that NTA has the resources to get this funding out the door in time, in a timely and efficient manner to close the digital divide, particularly in rural states like mine. So Secretary Armando, does NTIA have the resources it needs to get the job done?
Yes, I believe we do. Thank you for your leadership in passing the bipartisan infrastructure law. Resources are not our challenge right now. The discussion I just had with Senator Capito, this is an enormous lift. It's a coordination lift. What I can use from members of Congress is like information from the ground. Work with us, work with your governor. Help us to coordinate this on the ground so that we are effective.
So can you tell me how NTIA is ramping up? How is the agency staffing up, structuring its teams to effectively engage with what you said, each state with tailored assistance?
Yeah, thank you. So we're in the process of hiring over 100 people. We have already onboarded dozens of people. We are planning to have a core team kind of at headquarters to do outreach, which is a huge piece of this, the outreach and stakeholder engagement. I think this is going to rise and fall based upon the quality of our stakeholder engagement. So we have a lot of people doing that. We plan to have a single point person for every state so that we can, have that coordination. We're also adding technical expertise. If we're going to go toe-to-toe with providers and protect taxpayers, we need the best and the brightest who know telecom and broadband. So we're hiring technical expertise, we're hiring lawyers. And like I said, when it's all said and done, we're going to have to take on well over 100 people to get this done.
Okay, so each state will have a point person. Will they be located in that state or somewhere else? Not that that's important if they have good broadband service.
Most of them will not be in DC. They'll either be in your state or in that region.
Okay, and when do you anticipate they will be available for the states to contact?
I'll get back to you on when your region's person will be there, but these people are coming on a rolling basis. And right now, we're all hands on deck to get the NOFO out on May 16th. And then over the summer, we're going to start to increase, the pace that we onboard these people.
Okay, so what about Indian country? How are you're going to depend upon the state to do the outreach there, or are you guys going to have a special person for the Native Americans?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. We have a whole team for tribal outreach. We did a consultation in January. I should say this is very important. We have a whole team to do technical assistance for the tribes. And we've learned that they're going to require a great deal of technical assistance. So for example, in the first tribal monies that we put out, 73% of the submissions required our technical assistance to do some kind of curing. So we're not saying no to the tribes if their applications aren't up to snuff. We're working with them. with technical assistance to improve the quality of their application so that we can get the money out the door. Granted, it takes a little longer, but we've stood up a team here and regionally just to work with the tribes so we can provide them the assistance they need, especially the ones that are smaller and don't have the resources. We are deadly serious about making sure everyone who lives on a tribal land has access to broadband at the end of our work.
I appreciate that. The consultation was done via Zoom, I would assume?
Yes.
And what kind of participation did you have? Do you know offhand?
I will get back to you. I don't know the exact number. I know it was, we were overwhelmed with the response. I participated. We had a huge response. I should say all of our consultations or our stakeholder outreach, we're routinely, in one of them we had over 1,000 people participate, and one of them 700 people. I'll get you the exact number on the tribal, but I know it was robust.
That's really not important. What's important is that you did have a broad representation of large land-based tribes, gaming
Yes.
tribes, other tribes
Yes.
that are in there.
That
Yeah.
I can assure you, yes.
Okay, good. Just the last thing is the timelines for getting this money out the door. Have you set any timelines for that?
Well, like I said, we want to, the NOFA will be on the street May 16th. Every state then has to give us a letter of intent, their intention to participate. We will very quickly, within 30 days, get them planning money out the door. And then, honestly, it depends on the FCC maps and how quickly we have them before we can get the rest of the money out the door.
Thank you. I really appreciate your work. I appreciate your common sense attitude and work ethic. And I know that you're going to be also making sure that there's adequate oversight on these monies to make sure that we're getting the bang for the buck. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Secretary Raimondo.
Thank you. I don't know if Senator Young is available. I know Senator Lee was here. I don't know if he's available remotely. If not, we'll go to Senator Rosen.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. Ranking Member Wicker is not here, but thank him as well. Secretary Raimondo, thank you for being here today. I'm so glad you've been traveling, as I hear you saying that, setting up, talking to folks about increasing our domestic supply chain and working on manufacturing and all these roundtables. And I hope you plan to come to Nevada, because if you would come to Nevada and listen to what we're concerned about, this is what we would tell you, that the solar industry is incredibly important to my home state of Nevada, where we have the most solar jobs per capita in the entire country. I'm extremely disappointed with the administration's extension of Section 201 tariffs on imported solar products, and I also have very serious concerns with the Commerce Department's recent decision to initiate an investigation into solar panel imports. Already, as a result of Commerce decision, industry surveys indicate over 80% of U.S. solar companies report being notified of canceled or delayed panel supply. Without a reliable and cost-effective source of panels, and I can tell you this is hitting New Mexico here, I have Senator Lujan next to me. Without a reliable source, existing and proposed solar projects could come to a halt. This will jeopardize tens of thousands of good-paying American solar jobs, could raise energy prices for consumers, and also undermines the administration's clean energy climate goals. So, Secretary Raimondo, I understand your department has until August 29th to make a preliminary determination on this inquiry. However, the investigation is already negatively impacting U.S. solar companies, and the longer the situation persists, the more severe the damage will be. Will you consider making an expedited preliminary determination in this matter?
Yeah. Thank you for your question, Senator. You and I have talked about this. I share your concern.
We haven't talked about this. But.
Well, the issue generally, the issue generally, and you've expressed your concern to me about how important these solar jobs are. And of course, the administration is fully supportive of enhancing the solar industry and doing whatever we can to meet climate
I have limited
change.
time.
Yeah,
will you commit to making a preliminary, an expedited preliminary determination?
Here's what I will commit to. We're required by statute, my hands are very tied here. I'm required by statute to investigate a claim that companies operating in other countries are trying to circumvent the duties. And I'm required by statute to have a fulsome investigation. What I will commit to you is moving as fast as possible, consistent with the statute to conduct that investigation. I understand you need certainty, but I have to follow the statute.
That's fine. Let me ask you the next question then, because there are constructive policy options to spur our domestic solar manufacturing industry other than imposing additional tariffs on U.S. companies. So can you tell me what steps the Commerce Department is taking to support? You're talking about increasing American manufacturing, helping our supply chain, creating jobs. If we lose these jobs, they won't come back. So what are you planning to help us do for domestic solar manufacturing in the next fiscal year?
Yeah, a couple things. One, the budget calls for increased funding to NIST, and some of that money will be used for exactly this, research on solar capture, solar storing, solar
None for manufacturing, as
technology.
far as you know?
And then also, it calls for increased funding for MEPs, and there'll be a specific focus on clean energy, clean technology, and helping small clean tech companies in the MEP program, and also increases in supply chain. And we'll have a great focus on the solar supply chain if we are going to be successful in receiving the extra supply chain money.
Well, these tariffs are hurting the supply chain. It's hurting the solar industry. I'm afraid it's not going to come back. But let me move quickly about travel and tourism. I'm going to submit this for the record, but we have our Omnibus Travel and Tourism Act with Ranking Member Scott. And I just thought if you had a few moments, you might talk about the importance of a coordinated whole-of-government approach to improving our global competitiveness for tourism domestically. Our omnibus would create an undersecretary in Department of Commerce to oversee domestic tourism, help us through the pandemic, and have a domestic strategy.
Which I would support, and we're trying, like, even within commerce, I have increased coordination between EDA and ITA. We do need what you say, which is full coordination. As I said earlier, we're still 1.5 million jobs in travel and tourism below where we were pre-pandemic. We have not fully recovered. You see that in your state. So, yes, I would fully support that.
Thank you. I appreciate it. My time is up, Madam Chair.
Thank you. I've called, but I'm not going to keep calling out other people unless I see them on the screen. So Senator Cruz would be next, followed by Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Secretary, welcome.
Morning.
For a long time, I've been very concerned about the Biden administration's foreign policy. Foreign policy that consistently alienates our friends and shows weakness and appeasement to our enemies. Now, the Commerce Department, typically your mandate does not focus primarily on foreign policy. But I will say recently that has been less the case. If you look at China, and your confirmation hearing focused quite a bit on your willingness to stand up to Communist China and on the repeated decisions from the Biden administration to show weakness to Communist China. The eyes of the world are on Taiwan. Under this administration, Vladimir Putin has invaded Ukraine. He's done so in significant part because of, I believe, this administration's weakness on foreign policy. And Xi in China is watching very carefully and quite openly contemplating invading Taiwan. So I was deeply concerned when the Commerce Department put out a press release that referred to Taipei as Chinese Taipei. Now, that is not a mild oversight. That is not a typo. That is not a mistake. Chinese Taipei is a term of propaganda pushed aggressively by the Chinese Communist Party because they insist Taiwan is not a country. Taiwan is not a separate entity. It is instead part of Communist China. And for the Commerce Department to embrace the Chinese Communist government's language about Taiwan, to put it in a formal press release, it both undermines our ally Taiwan and it emboldens Communist China. So my question is, why would the Commerce Department refer to Taipei as Chinese Taipei?
Yes, thank you, Senator, for your question. And by the way, the administration, including I, are clear-eyed about the threats China poses to us, and I've been very strong in my tenure as it relates to China. Taiwan signed the declaration. Their signatory line was as Chinese Taipei. So this reflects no change in policy. It's how they chose to sign the declaration, and that's why it appeared that way in the press release.
All right, let's turn to a different example. It's not just Taiwan that this administration undermines. It is our allies across the globe. When you turn to Israel, on April 16th, 2022, Vice President Kamala Harris held a Passover Seder at the Vice President's residence. They served kosher wine from the Sagat winery located in Samaria near Jerusalem. This was apparently a huge scandal among the Biden administration's radical leftist base, which loudly and immediately complained. So the administration ran to Twitter, and a senior advisor to the vice president posted this: "The wine served at the Seder was in no way intended to be an expression of policy." Now, that's a pretty big deal. The issue of labeling Israeli goods and what goods are made in areas of Israel goes back decades, goes to the core of Israel's sovereignty over its territories. The Obama administration reissued a labeling order to prevent goods made in Judea and Samaria from being labeled as Israeli. So my question is simple. The vice president's staff said serving wine from an Israeli winery located in Samaria was in no way intended to be an expression of policy. Jurisdiction for this is within the Commerce Department. What is the administration's policy with regards to the labeling and the import of goods from Israel and its territories?
I'm going to have to get back to you on that, and this is, I was not aware of this, but I will follow up with you.
And I will point out that in the Commerce Department, the Office of Anti-Boycott Compliance answers to you. Does this winery in Samaria count for you as an Israeli company, and would participation in a state boycott targeting require scrutiny from the Office of Anti-Boycott Compliance?
Yeah, like I said, let me look into this, and I'll be back to you with the details.
Well, I look forward to your answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Peters.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Secretary Raimondo. Good to see you once again. Thank you for being here today. Secretary Raimondo, I want to start talking about the CHIPS Act, which we have before us right now. And I believe it's essential that we fund the CHIPS Act so we can grow good-paying jobs here in America, involved in designing and making semiconductor chips. But funding the CHIPS Act isn't just about creating jobs in the semiconductor industry. It's about supporting all the jobs that depend on those semiconductor chips. And in a modern economy, chips play a vital role, certainly in many, many different areas. But there's no better example in my mind than the auto industry. In the 1970s, some cars just had a handful of chips, but now, a few decades later, the modern cars can contain up to 10,000 semiconductor chips in every car that handles everything from safety features to telematics to entertainment systems. And certainly that explains why the recent chip shortage has hurt auto production, as I know you're very well aware, along with many workers and families whose livelihoods are impacted by it. It's bad for the whole economy, and the ripple effects in the auto industry go through the whole economy. And that's why I think when we think about policies to support domestic semiconductor production, we must also ensure that we're addressing the needs of our economy and national security. Senator Stabenow and I led legislation which has passed the Senate and the House to dedicate $2 billion in CHIPS Act incentives to boost domestic production of semiconductor chips required for auto productions, referred to as mature chips, the kinds of chips that are necessary for other manufacturers, not just auto industry, but things like washing machines and everyday appliances. So my question for you, Madam Secretary, is do you support the proposal to dedicate $2 billion in the CHIPS Act incentives to growing and domestic production of mature semiconductor technologies in the United States? And if Congress does indeed fund the CHIPS Act, which I hope we will do soon, will you commit to ensuring that the department implements these funds in consultation with industries and workers, particularly in industries like the auto industry? If you could talk about that, I'd appreciate it.
Nice to see you, Senator. Yes, the answer is yes and yes. I would say it isn't just the auto industry. The medical device industry, for example, is a huge consumer of these quote-unquote legacy chips, mature, feature-rich chips. And in the recent RFI that we did, we found that this is where the shortage is. So yes, we would support it, and yes, we absolutely will implement it in coordination with industry and with you.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you, Madam Secretary. One area that I've been particularly focused on is making sure that our supply chains are resilient so that we can expand domestic production of these chips. And in December, I introduced the Investing in Domestic Semiconductor Manufacturing Act, along with several of my colleagues, including many on this committee. The bill would clarify provisions of the CHIPS Act to ensure that upstream suppliers are eligible for incentives to grow. These are suppliers that make chip manufacturing possible by providing the necessary materials and the manufacturing equipment necessary to produce these chips. Indeed, I believe your department's analysis of semiconductor supply chains discussed the important role of these upstream suppliers and the role that they play in supporting our national goals. For all these reasons, the House included the language in the competitiveness package in the Competes Act. And now as we go to conference, and I've been appointed as one of the conferees for negotiations, we're going to be fighting to make sure that that proposal gets put into the final product. So my question to you, Madam Secretary, is do you agree that domestic semiconductor production will be at risk if we fail to adequately support upstream suppliers that actually facilitate chip manufacturing?
Absolutely, there's no doubt of that. I would be remiss if I didn't say and implore you and your colleagues to act with urgency through that conference process. As we discussed earlier, there's a very real risk of waiting here, which is that these chip companies are going to be expanding, and they'll expand in other countries if we don't move quickly. So I am at your service to do whatever I can to move that conference quickly.
Well, I appreciate that, and I think you agree with the general proposal that we have that would ensure that upstream suppliers are actually eligible for some of those CHIP Act incentives. As we put that out, it's not just the manufacturers themselves, it's that entire supply chain.
The whole supply chain.
Great. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you for your leadership on this issue as well. Appreciated you coming out to Detroit not too long ago to dig deeper into the issue of the auto industry. I know it's something you're passionate about, and I appreciate your interest in Michigan as well. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Senator.
Senator Lujan.
Thank you, Chair Cantwell. Secretary Mudo, good to see you today. As you mentioned in your opening statement, I want to thank you, recognize the importance of the Minority Business Development Agency, something that was very important to our chair, to the ranking member, passed bipartisanly through the House and through the Senate. And it's great that for the first time in 50 years, we finally have what is now, I hope that will be a permanent Minority Business Development Agency. And earlier this month, we were very pleased that leadership from the Department of Commerce was in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to open up our Business Development Center. And so the question that I have is, in this particular space, Secretary, yes or no, do you currently have the funding to launch the Rural Business Center program?
So first, let me say it's great to see you back, healthy and in person. No, if you want the short answer. The money that we're requesting, the $110 million, would be enough to launch the rural business centers. which will be done in partnership with minority-serving institutions. But currently, the FY22 appropriations only gave us half of that and directed us to use the money to expand our existing business centers. So we're going to be, with that money, adding 6 new business centers, but we don't now have the money to do rural, which is why we're asking for it in this appropriation. And the good news, I will tell you, is if we are successful in getting the money we're asking for in this appropriation bill, we've already been doing all of the outreach with the minority-serving institutions, so we'll be ready to hit the ground running to set up the rural centers.
I appreciate that, and I'll do everything I can with my colleagues on the Appropriations Committee and the staff over there to make sure this gets the attention that it deserves. My follow-up there is, in the absence of additional resources for the program, what are you doing to support the minority-owned rural businesses now?
Well, currently, we do serve them to the best of our abilities with our existing business centers. And, you know, I think we do a good job of that. But as you know yourself, you need to be present in place in order to really do this work. So we are increasing our efforts to rural America. By the way, MBDA and EDA, we're working very hard with EDA. But the truth of it is we need the money to set up proper rural business centers with minority-serving institutions so we can be in the community and meet the needs of the, you know, population.
Appreciate that. Well, I'll work with my colleagues again bipartisanly here, and this is an area of great interest to many of us, so we'll be looking, I hope that once we secure that funding, that we're ready to roll and that we're able to take some of that investment and get ready for that as well. Madam Secretary, one area that I've talked to you quite a bit is just with connectivity, and following sort with many of my colleagues that have asked that question today. Will the funding connect every family in New Mexico to affordable, reliable, high-speed broadband that's currently in the bipartisan infrastructure bill, in addition to some of the benefits from funding that was received in 2020 to NTIA?
Yes, that is certainly the plan. The President has been crystal clear with me that anything less than that will be unsatisfactory. We want to get to everyone and, importantly, make sure that it's affordable. And I'm very serious about that because, again, I come from a state where everyone has access to broadband, but if it's $70, $80, $90 a month, it's not, you might as well not have it. You can't afford it. So yes is the answer. We're going to work in the community to make sure there's ubiquity and affordability.
Well, I very much appreciate that this is the plan. The word that I've been given is that if there's not enough funding here, that money will be found to connect our state. And I'll be working with everyone to ensure that we're able to hit that goal. I very much support the plan, but I want to see it done across the country, and especially in hard-to-connect states. In another area, the programs that we've been able to work forward or move forward included funding for 91 full-time jobs to support the broadband program, which Senator Tester talked about. How many of those will be on the grounds in our states to ensure the program works in communities it's intended to serve?
Yeah, the majority will not be in DC. So I don't know exactly the number out of 91, but the intention is that they not be in DC, that they be around the country in communities.
I'd like to follow up on that and get some specifics because what's floating around is that none of them will be in the States. And so I think it's important to correct that record. So I look forward to helping you do that as well. So thank you for that clarification.
I can say on the record now the majority will not be in DC, but we'll get back to you with the details.
I appreciate that. And I don't want to pick on any of my colleagues, but relying solely on states might work in some of the larger ones where they have some of that expertise. And even though it's still considered a hard-to-connect state, places like California, and you know, I often compare New Mexico to Rhode Island, reminding everyone that out there, the highest hill is 800 feet. That's my backyard. In areas that we have big mountains and topography challenges where 30% of the land is federal land, it's important to me that we all work with all the partners there. So I have several other questions. I'll submit them into the record, but it's always an honor to see you and your team, and very much appreciate working with you. Thank you, Chair Cantwell.
Thank you. Senator Sinema.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Chair Cantwell, and thank you to Secretary Raimondo for joining us today. You know, the Department of Commerce has a crucial role to help Arizonans address the supply chain crisis, support business growth, and create good-paying jobs. The department has a wide range of tools to assist with many important Arizona priorities, such as addressing the historic drought in the Southwest, increasing domestic manufacturing of semiconductors, and expanding broadband to all corners of our state. I look forward to working with you, Secretary, and with my colleagues on this committee to continue to advance these efforts in a bipartisan manner to help Arizona families. My first question is about fire season. As you know, fire season has already begun in Arizona as the Southwest experiences the most severe drought in 1,200 years. The tunnel fire north of Flagstaff has burned over 20,000 acres, and a state of emergency has been declared in Coconino County. The Cruz fire has burned over 6,000 acres south of Prescott. My thoughts are with my fellow Arizonans affected by these disasters and with our first responders, our wildland firefighters, and their families as they work to contain these wildfires. Arizonans rely on National Weather Service predictions and National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration data to predict fire trajectory and determine impacts to landscapes and human health. It's important that Noaa, and the Weather Service have the resources and expertise needed to predict weather and drought conditions. So, Secretary, the bipartisan infrastructure law included $80 million for Noaa high-performance computing technology and $50 million for wildfire prediction, detection, and forecasting. How will these resources allow Noaa to improve drought and wildfire prediction forecasting?
Thank you, Senator, for your question. And I'll say parenthetically, a number of commerce employees who were in Colorado were put out of their homes due to wildfires. So we have had real-time recent experience with this. The president's budget, the 23 budget, includes increases, as you say, to help communities manage the impacts of drought. We will be investing the money in better data and forecasting models for wildfires. We're also expanding the work we do in communities. We're putting a greater effort into helping communities prepare their mitigation plans for wildfire, and primarily we're making big investments in the way we collect data and do forecasting for droughts so that it can be more sophisticated. And of course, there's the link between droughts and wildfires. The last thing I'll say is in the budget, we're requesting additional funds to broaden tribal engagement on this issue of precipitation prediction to make sure that they're fully engaged in the work we're doing around droughts and wildfire prevention.
Thank you. As the Southwest continues to face historic drought, we must use every available tool to assess the length and severity of drought conditions. The National Integrated Drought Information System has been helpful to me when determining policy responses for drought-stricken areas, but I believe we can always improve. How has the department worked to coordinate drought response with other agencies, particularly with the Department of Interior, Bureau of Reclamation, and USDA? And how can you make this interagency process more effective so drought mitigation policies can be targeted for maximum impact of federal dollars?
Yes, thank you. So I will tell you, since I've been at this job for over a year, I'm constantly trying to find ways to make the interagency more effective and efficient. And I would welcome kind of following up with you on that. We are very focused on this. And again, in our commerce family, like a dozen people were rendered homeless because of wildfires, which has given us a new sense of urgency. So Noaa is responsible for the data and the prediction analytics. And as I say, we're working with communities. We are working, I think, hand in glove with Interior, with USDA, trying to maximize the impact. But again, I would welcome any ideas that you have on how we could do an increasingly better job.
Thank you, Secretary. You know, Arizona is a national leader in semiconductor manufacturing and in research development and innovation, including at our state universities. The semiconductor industry currently employs over 20,000 Arizonans. I was proud to be original co-sponsor of the Chips for America Act to restore America's leadership in semiconductor manufacturing, which is crucial for both our economic and national security. In response to the CHIPS Act, we've seen both Intel and TSMC announce significant investments in Arizona manufacturing. Now, the Senate passed its competition bill last May, and I look forward to Congress finishing its job and getting this competition bill to the president's desk with all the funding for CHIPS grant included. But all the stakeholders in Arizona, from our manufacturers and suppliers to our research universities, our local government leaders, are eager for this funding to flow. In anticipation of our competition bill becoming law, what is the department doing right now to prepare, and how long until this money will get out the door after passage?
Yes, thank you, Senator, and thank you for your leadership on that. As you say, Arizona has a lot at stake here. I want to be crystal clear about this. We cannot do anything unless and until Congress passes the law, gets it to the president's desk. So we have to put our shoulder to the grindstone in this conference. We cannot wait. We cannot delay. Other countries aren't waiting, and we have to get this to the president's desk. For our part, we are already hard at work. We are doing a huge amount of stakeholder engagement. We've just recently issued a request for information from industry to try to learn where are the shortages, how can we work with them. We've created an internal organizational chart to know, where this will live, who we need to hire. We will be able to hit the ground running. Nothing's going to happen until Congress does its job and passes the bipartisan legislation. So I'll do anything I can to help with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Young.
Good to see you, Secretary Raimondo.
Hello.
Thanks so much for your leadership. American leadership in science and technology, especially the emerging technologies that will dominate the 21st century, is vital to both the future of the American economy and to our competitiveness with China. I want to thank you for your significant efforts thus far to ensure that USICA advances through the process. It is now, as you say, it's Congress's job to do our work and get this legislation in a bipartisan fashion on the President's desk. One of my top priorities in USICA is the regional technology hubs. Can you discuss the importance of the regional tech hubs and the impact they'll have on non-coastal, non-traditional areas of the country?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for your leadership and your spirit of cooperation on this. We talk all the time about chips, but the tech hubs are every bit as important. And they're designed to create, ecosystems of innovation in communities around the country that have been, overlooked. And for example, in the Midwest, there are fantastic research universities. I think Purdue just launched a whole new program for semiconductor master's programs. Right. So what we want to do is in regions around the country, bring together research institutions with entrepreneurs, with companies to take the great ideas coming out of the research institutions and translate them into products that we can make. I will say this, we need more fabs in America, no question about it. We need more semiconductor manufacturing capacity. That isn't nearly enough. That isn't nearly enough. We need to start increasing our innovation in all emerging technologies, in semiconductors, in design, in packaging, in energy efficiency. And all of that starts at the ground level. And it isn't all going to happen in Silicon Valley, Boston, and Austin, Texas. So this is about, getting throughout America, tapping into that research and creating a workforce and deep wells of, like I said, ecosystems of talent and entrepreneurship and innovation and activity.
That's how I see it, Secretary. Building on existing assets, existing bases of talent, whether it's in the universities or outside the walls of the university. We have incredible talent across this country. It just needs to be harnessed as we have harness talent with the assistance of government as customer or government as investor in past generations in places like Silicon Valley or the Research Triangle of North Carolina or in Boston. And so places like Indiana, and there are many out there that would benefit from these sorts of investments. Another value proposition I consistently hear about as we discuss the tech hubs is from venture capitalists. It's a frequent lamentation of those who start startup businesses in the state of Indiana that you have to go to a place like Silicon Valley to get your business model funded. And the venture capitalists are saying, well, if you make these sorts of investments, we're going to be making a lot more visits too, spending more time focusing on geographies like the state of Indiana. So this is also a major source of interest to all of them. Do you have any thoughts based on your professional background before you were involved in government on that topic?
Yes, I think what you say is exactly right. So right now, about 90% of all venture capital money flows into 6 or 7 cities and towns in America. 90%. And you know what they are, as you say, Silicon Valley, Boston, right. New York, et cetera. I promise you, not 90% of all entrepreneurs, entrepreneurial talent, or innovation is in those 6 places. But venture capitalists want to see a critical mass before they start traveling there to invest. And that's what these tech hubs will do, create some critical mass. There's also what we refer to in the business as the valley of death, which is you get a little startup money, but then it's hard to raise money here to get to scale. This is sort of the valley of death. Tech hubs will help to get companies through that valley of death so they can access deeper pools of capital.
That's the tech maturation monies that will go to
Yes.
designated hubs, right?
Yes, exactly.
Well, I see my time is coming to an end, but sometimes people try and figure out how to characterize this legislation. Is it innovation legislation? Is it a China competitiveness bill? Do you know there's a happy coincidence between the two? And if we can harness the talent, the energies, the entrepreneurial spirit, the broad, deep capital markets of the United States of America and become more innovative, there's no doubt in my mind that we're going to win the 21st century for American values. So they are really they're two sides of the same coin. And so thank you for speaking to that important feature of USICA. We'll do our work and hopefully get it done here in coming months. Thank you, Chairman.
Yeah,
Thank
you. And
Thank you.
And thank you, Senator Young, for the legislation and your participation in it. And I would just say that Senator Young and I had a chance to jointly recently speak at a symposium here by Notre Dame. And I think the thing that we keep forgetting in this issue is that we do have distributed generation already in our institutions. And so this is so much about taking what's there and dusting off our R&D capabilities and making it faster and more invested, through the hubs and through the tech center. So I do think, when we think about the response that we're now seeing from China and others, all of a sudden they're going to try to accelerate their innovation. Never underestimate what we already have invested in our university systems and how they're going to help us. And that is, part of the network that we don't spend enough time talking about. I bet if we get to conference, we're going to spend a lot of time talking about it, that and EPSCoR and everything else and but this distributed network that's represented by these institutions really is a very, very powerful American tool.
Yeah,
So,
I couldn't agree more.
okay, Senator Warnock.
Thank you so very much, Madam Chair, and great to see you again, Secretary Raimondo. Everywhere I go in Georgia, I'm hearing from families who are struggling because of shortages and breakdowns in our supply chains. I recently visited Noonan, Georgia, a town that is suffering a year later from the devastation of a tornado. Families there have been struggling to rebuild their lives, and as they try to get their lives going again, one of the biggest problems that they have is windows. Folks simply can't get windows delivered quickly enough so that they can get back in their homes a year after the tornado. This year, the Department of Commerce has requested over $15 million to analyze global supply chains. And I think it's important to collect this data. But we're now years into this crisis, and Georgia families need more than data, obviously. They need help. Secretary Raimondo, what is the value of having this new information, and how will it inform your specific actions to address supply chain issues?
Yeah, thank you, Senator. And those are heartbreaking stories, and we hear them all over the country. I don't think anyone predicted how much havoc COVID could wreak on our supply chains. And if we've learned one thing these past couple of years, it's that the federal government is woefully under-researched and under-focused on supply chains and shoring up our resiliency. So what we are doing, and I'll follow up with you specifically on the windows to see what we can do. Because by the way, what I've learned is you have to go deep into each sector. And so I'll follow up to help you with that.
That would be great.
But in any event, what we need to do is have a continuous, constant monitoring and mapping of these supply chains. We need to provide financing. We've lost 25% of our small and medium-sized manufacturers in the past 25 years. Our small and medium-sized manufacturing industrial base has been decimated. Germany, Japan, other countries, they invest. They make small loans available to small manufacturers so they can provide these goods to our people. So that's what the Department of Commerce ought to be doing, and that's why we're requesting this money. Not so that we can just fight the fires associated with supply chain disruptions from Russia or COVID, but so that we can prevent these disasters in the future.
Right. And if Congress appropriates this funding, what supply chain improvements will Georgia families see when they're at the grocery store or the hardware store buying school supplies? When will they actually start seeing these changes?
Look, I hope that people are starting to feel it a little bit every week, every month, every year. We are working, as I said earlier, I currently have 40 work streams going on supply chains. This stuff, I wish I could flip a switch. You can't. But we're, congestion at the ports is down. Better pricing in lumber. We're seeing it. We're just going to have to stay at it with the vigilance and sense of urgency every day, product by product.
And beyond the budget process, we also have an opportunity to strengthen supply chains through the bipartisan competition bill. I look forward to that work happening here in the Senate. I'm a proud member of the conference committee representing the concerns of Georgians. I'm glad that we agree that one of the top priorities should be to shore up the semiconductor supply chain through funding incentives to bring chips manufacturing to the United States. It's been almost a year since we considered this funding in this committee. Will you be ready to distribute the funding as soon as it's available?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we have to go through the process and the statutory requirements, but we are already laying the groundwork. I would suggest, Senator, that the single most important thing you or any senator can do to ease the inflationary pressures and supply chain problems in your state is to quickly pass USICA, or the Bipartisan Innovation Law. That calls for work on chips, which are in every piece of electronics. It calls for an establishment of a supply chain office. We will never be able to fundamentally solve these problems for your constituents until that law is passed and the federal government is implementing it.
I certainly agree there that we need to get this law passed as soon as possible so we can provide real relief to the supply chain crisis, its impact on ordinary folks. And I look forward to fighting to make that happen as soon as possible. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Nice to see you.
Well, I think I would add, Senator Warnock, as the issue of another supply chain problem was looming large. That is the SKLG issue on battery technology.
Yep.
I don't think I heard more from a concerned member than Senator Warnock, who provided great leadership in bringing people's attention to it, and Secretary Raimondo digging in at the executive branch to solve the problem. So I want to say I appreciate both of you for being on the ball on that particular problem. And I think it's just an example. It really was like one of the first big supply chain crises that we had, and literally would have meant the loss of thousands of jobs in Georgia if we didn't solve that problem. So very much want to thank you, Secretary Raimondo, for your leadership on that. And again, thanks Senator Warnock for his persistence, because he was very persistent on this issue. Well, I think that's has the first round, unless there's a member that I'm not seeing online or are swiftly on their way. I would just like to ask a second round follow-up question on the Office of Space Commerce. Is there an update on that? Is there something you can tell us? I know my colleague Senator Wicker has left, but is there something you can tell us about that particular post and position?
Yes, I appreciate that. So I know this is a priority of yours and the ranking member. I'm very pleased to say that we are going to be announcing a new director, Richard Dalbello. He has 25 plus years of space experience in the commercial sector, and he was at the in the White House Office of Science and Technology. And we're elevating the Office of Space Commerce within NOAA. So he starts May 9th. and he'll be reporting right up into the Noaa headquarters. And we are, of course, in the budget requesting money primarily for the new cloud-based monitoring system, so we can do a much better job of monitoring space traffic. So I think that, like, at long last, we are, I don't know, organizing, prioritizing space commerce and putting leadership in that we need, and I'm very much asking Congress for support on the funding that the President requests.
Well, thank you. That certainly is good news, and I think Senator Wicker will be pleased with that as well, and look forward to whatever we have to do to support that effort. I would just say, you know, with thousands of jobs already in the Pacific Northwest on this and a new frontier, I think lots of people are really trying to better understand this particular aspect of our commerce. And obviously, just like every other theme here we've been talking about is competition. And so for the United States to continue to look at this issue and move ahead, we think that that's critically important. Okay, well, I think that does it for this morning. Thank you, Madam Secretary, for being here and for your hard work on many subjects. And as you can see, the breadth and depth of commerce does bring everything from red snapper issues to
salmon.
To, well, in the fishing area, yes, but supply chain on ships and all sorts of things. So we appreciate your in-depth knowledge and attention to all of those details. Really very, very important for our country, and we appreciate your leadership. The hearing will be open for 2 weeks, and anybody who wants to submit questions, please do so by Wednesday, May 11th at noon, and Secretary Raimondo will have 2 weeks to respond to those. With that, the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you so much.